طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So we have finished the layer-based security protocols. Layer-based security protocols, they talk about trying to establish security context within a specific layer. The implication of this, as we have discussed in all the chapters before, is that the security context has a certain scope and a certain span, whether it's valid for a physical port or logical port in the case of network access layer, whether it's valid for all the communication that covers host-to-host or network-to-network communication in the case of IPsec, or or this security context is actually valid to facilitate the communication between two application endpoints in the case of transport layer security, whether it's TLS or SSH, and so on. So all these security protocols, they focus on a certain layer. However, when it comes to attacks, okay, or in some cases we call it intrusion, the intrusion is not necessarily layer-based. So the intruder, in fact, performs a holistic kind of attack which can span more than one layer, okay? So the attacker performs different types of steps which involves many of these layers all together in one procedure, right? So the attacker can try to find a modem or a physical network device that does not implement, for example, network access layer security. So this modem is open. It does not restrict the fact that you have to authenticate the physical port before accessing the network. So in that case, the attacker might take this as a loophole or as a point of attack. But in order for this intrusion to become complete, the attacker needs to use that open modem to send some, like for example, a message injection into the network. He can inject some routing messages, or he can try to gain access to the physical network and try to find another machine with an open port, and from that port he can try to dive into the machine and try to read some password file or something like this. So all these steps, okay, they involve different types of communication in different layers, right? So the attacker might in fact take a complicated procedure which involves many of these layers all together, right? So just the fact that you implement security in a certain layer, it doesn't mean that you are protected by any means, okay? So even if you implement security in all these layers, right, you cannot guarantee that all the nodes or the network devices in the network, okay, they implement all these security techniques in all the layers, right? So the attacker, in fact, scans the entire network to see some loopholes and start to use these loopholes to perform some kind of targeted attacks which can involve multiple layers. So with that said, we need to have a second line of defense, which is not about implementing security techniques per se. It's about trying to detect these types of intrusions, right? A perfect example is firewalls, مثلا. Okay? So firewalls, they don't necessarily focus on a certain layer. And their job is not to implement security protocols. ماشي? The firewalls or intrusion detection systems, their function is not to implement security protocols or adopt certain security standards. That's not the job. The job of these devices or systems is to try to detect the intrusion. But as we said, the intrusion is in fact a complicated procedure which can perform different steps in different layers. Okay? So as you can imagine, detecting these types of intrusions or complicated intrusions might involve some intelligence. ماشي؟ يعني it's not enough to say, okay, so I will, any communication that happens on this port, I will block it as easy as this. Okay? It's not as easy as this because, the attacker might not attack this particular port. It might actually look in a lower layer and try to have some physical access to some network node, and from there, it can perform the attack, right? So detecting these types of complicated procedures is a totally different concept. It's not something that we have studied, okay, in previous chapters. So this is the main idea of this chapter, is to try to first agree on certain definitions, okay? What is intrusion, okay? What are the types of intruders? What are the motivation of these intruders? Why do they do this? Okay? And what is the implication and what are the key examples of these intrusions? ماشي? Then, agreeing on this definition, the second part of this chapter, we will talk about بقى intrusion detection systems. What are the types of these intrusion detection systems? Okay? What are they trying to detect and how? What are the methodologies that these intrusion detection systems they can follow in order to say that, okay, this is an intrusion, this is not an intrusion. Okay? ماشي? So what are these systems and how they work? ماشي? So these are basically in a nutshell what we are going to talk about in this chapter. So the first part is very light. It's just to agree on certain terms, certain definitions. Very basic definitions. So what are the types of intruders? What is an intruder? Intruder هو شخص في الآخر. Okay? And there are three types of these intruders. The first one, we call it a masquerader. Masquerader is يعني اللي هو الشخص الإيه؟ المتخفي أو اللي هو يعني شخص متخفي. He is trying to disguise and pretend that he is a legitimate user, but he is not a legitimate user. And this masquerader is usually شخص who is actually external to the organization. Okay? So I'm not from Qatar University, but I'm trying to intrude on the network of Qatar University. So I'm trying to attack the network of Qatar University, right? So that's what we call a masquerader. So masquerader is an individual who is not authorized to use the computer. هو شخص external and who penetrates the system's access controls, okay, to exploit a legitimate user's account. So I don't have an account at Qatar University, but through some intrusion, I was able to get access to Muhammad's account. Okay? So using this account, I can use it to access certain parts of the network and try to perform different types of attack. ماشي؟ المسفيزر بقى اللي هو الشخص الفاسد بالعربي. مسفيزر هو الشخص ده بقى شخص internal. Okay? This user is an internal user. Yet, this user wants to, in fact, perform certain intrusion on the network of the company that he is in. ماشي? So he has user access. He can use that user access to try to perform certain damage to the organization. Okay? So of course he has legitimate access. ماشي? So that's the difference between masquerader and misfeasor. Clandestine user بقى, clandestine user هو شخص not only internal, he is an internal person who has root access. يعني administrator. Okay? So why do we categorize the intruders in these three categories? Because there has been lots of studies that really prove that detecting the intrusion performed by masqueraders is always easy to do. Okay? You can do that. Okay? It's proven to be relatively easy. Misfeasor is still possible, but it requires very sophisticated intrusion detection techniques, which we will study in the second part of this chapter. ماشي? Clandestine is the hardest. It's very, very hard. And usually you cannot really detect these types of intrusions. اللي هو بقى يعني مثلا لو حد فيكم شاف جوراسيك بارك موفي مثلا خلاص once you have an admin, he's got root access to the system, he can يعني damage the entire organization in no time because he has root access. How can you, even if you detect خلاص detect okay, but you cannot have enough time to really يعني perform any countermeasures to prevent any damage because he has root access, so he can actually perform the damage in no time. Okay, so this is the difference between these three types of intruders. ماشي? So masquerader is an external person, misfeasor is an internal user, clandestine is an internal admin or someone with root access. ماشي كده؟ So these are the types of intrusion. طيب, what are examples of intrusion بقى؟ ماشي؟ The intruder can perform any of these attacks individually or collectively. Okay? So performing a remote root compromise of an email server. So somehow I get access to a root access of an email server. In that case, I can damage the entire server, so I stop the email service in the entire university. ماشي? So this is a very critical attack because email service is a very basic service that all of us are using. So if someone can do that, then it's a big deal, right? You see the whole email service in the university is down. You cannot send or receive any email. So it's a very critical thing. Defacing a web server means that you get access to the web page content and you can replace it by saying, ha ha ha, it's like the attacker would say, ha ha ha, I gain access to your page, and in order to recover the content of this page, you have to pay certain monies. Defacing معناها deforming the content of the web page. So imagine مثلا if someone does that مثلا for a web page like Google مثلا. He removes all the access to the search engine and he defaces the web page by saying, okay, so I got access to the Google web page. It's a very طبعا big deal. Guessing and cracking passwords. Guessing طبعا passwords is part of يعني is part of crypto analysis, right? So if you use some easy to guess passwords, you will be subjected to these types of attacks. Okay? So if you use password like ABC123, or if you use a password that has يعني your son's name or your wife's name or something like this, that's usually some of the easy passwords to guess. When it comes to cracking passwords, cracking means that you may have access to the password file, assuming that this password file is stored on the server, okay, as plain text. In some systems until today, they do that. They do this. But طبعا احنا, as we have studied in Kerberos, of course, one of the techniques to store the password is to do hashing. برافو عليك. Is to hash the password, and hashing is one way, so you can never reverse the password. Okay, you can never reverse the password. And we'll study this again in this chapter. Copying a database containing credit card numbers. It sounds to you like this is a trivial thing to do, but it happened. In fact, it happened to some of the banking systems here in Qatar. Some people, they got access to that database and they were able to extract some of the credit card information.
Qatar University?
No, in Qatar in general. يعني some, يعني فاit's يعني if you can do this, it's a big deal. How do they perform these things? Again, it's not easy by just attacking certain layer. As we said, it's a composite action that requires several steps. So for example, if someone tries to have an access to the file, to a file مثلا stored on the server, user مثلا is trying to access a file on the server. This might sound like a legitimate access to you as مثلا as someone who's logging all the activities. Okay, this sounds like a legitimate thing to do. But if you can use the content in this file to gain some access to some keywords and use this keyword to attack us, so if you have consecutive steps that are consecutive, and this collective action, okay, is part of an intruder, so you need to have the intelligence to be able to detect that. This is a illegitimate behavior. Although every single step, if you look at it individually as a single step, it might look okay for you. Okay? يعني مثلا there is a modem that's open, it does not have network access security. Someone tries to access this modem. For you, it's okay. I have a modem open and he's trying to access it. That's fine. Okay? But if he uses that access to perform network injection and send some routing information, okay, this routing information does not have proper MAC and things like that, then this action, together with this action, is collectively classified as intrusion. Okay, so that's the idea here. So viewing sensitive information, including payload records, payroll records, this is privacy issue. Okay, and also the implication, sometimes the implication of the intrusion is not necessarily to perform critical damage, but even these types of intrusions is also not acceptable because it has to do with the privacy of the people. Okay, and you may have certain objectives behind this. Is to try مثلا to do some legal lawsuits against the organization that maybe the salary range in this organization مثلا is very high or very low or whatever. You never know. So gaining access to private information, okay, is always unacceptable, even if it does not imply direct damage to the organization. ماشي? So medical information. يعني I gain access مثلا to MRI data ولا EEG data of a certain person. Okay? It might look to you like, what's wrong with this? Okay? But it's a privacy issue. It's a privacy issue, which is forbidden by law. Okay? So that's also some type of intrusion, even if that intrusion does not imply direct damage. ماشي? Running a packet sniffer on a workstation to capture usernames and passwords, assuming that usernames are fine, but passwords, sometimes passwords, we didn't study any security standards that involves sending the password as plain text. But they are there, like Telnet مثلا. Telnet itself is not secure, right? So if you use Telnet, keep in mind that your password is being sent as plain text. Okay? And if somebody is sniffing, he would know your password right away. And that's why you need to be self-conscious that if you access certain websites, and these websites do not use HTTPS, yet you are trying to type user ID and password, make sure that your password is plain text. It gets sent to the website as plain text. Okay? And it might be sniffed by some attacker. This is the example that we talked about, dialing into an unsecured modem, which does not use network access security, posing an executive or calling the help desk. This is about some type of physical attack or physical impersonation. So I know some information about Nasser, so I call مثلا QMB. I'm Nasser. I need to مثلا do certain procedure in my account. They verify what they do naturally is that they verify your identity through asking you some questions. So by knowing some information, some private information about the person, this is one of the things that you can use to do certain intrusion. So on his account, so you can say, okay, I'm Nasser and my name is Kaza, مش عارف إيه, I was born in Kaza Kaza. Oh, okay, so now you're Nasser. What do you want to do? I want to transfer some money to another account. Okay, so this is some type of physical intrusion using unattended or logged-in workstation. So Nawaf is like accessing a workstation. He's trying to perform some legitimate work using all the security that we have studied, and everything is fine. And all of a sudden, he went to the bathroom, and another person came and he got access to the workstation. So that's why you need to have all sorts of mechanisms to try to time out and lock the screen, even if the person is not using the workstation for some period of time. Then you lock the screen automatically and so on. ماشي? So these are examples that it might be done individually or combined. Okay, so you can perform some of these intrusions in a combined way. طيب. As we said, the attack itself or the intrusion can be benign. Benign يعني similar to the fact that you gain access to private information, right? So in it of itself is not like, it does not imply direct damage, right? So I know مثلا the ECG of Muhammad. I know the ECG, I feel ECG the heart signal of Muhammad. Okay, so it's it's not a big deal, right? Unless بقى مثلا I use it مثلا to falsify some information in another system and try to show that Muhammad has heart attack even though he doesn't. ربنا يعافيك يعني. So that's another story. But intrusions themselves, they have to be categorized whether they are benign. Benign يعني إيه? Benign يعني not very critical, they do not cause direct damage, or malignant. Malignant يعني إيه? Malignant بقى يعني very critical. يعني مثلا I got access to all the credit card information مثلا in a certain bank. That's huge. ماشي? So the hackers, the attacks can be benign or malignant. ماشي? So in order for me to categorize the intrusion, whether it's benign or malignant, I need to have بقى certain or intrusion أصلا. يعني إحنا عندنا دلوقتي no intrusion. So Muhammad is working on the system, but all his behavior, all his action, they seem legitimate and normal. Okay, which means no intrusion. Okay, or intrusion. What he's doing now can be categorized as intrusion, and if it's intrusion, is it benign or is it malignant? Right? Benign معناها he's gaining access to some private information, but in order for him to use this to perform a malignant intrusion, this will come later مثلا. Okay? But currently what he's doing seems like a benign intrusion. Okay? Or this action is categorized as malignant intrusion. So in order for us to be able to categorize this intrusion, whether it's no intrusion, benign or malignant, we need some intelligence. Okay? That's why there is the concept of intrusion detection systems. And we call it systems because firewalls, these are intrusion detection device. But in fact, as we will study in this chapter, intrusion detection systems, they can actually include more than just a firewall, right? Firewall is just one node or one component which can help in the intrusion detection system. But in fact, intrusion detection systems are more general than just a firewall, right? But these intrusion detection systems, they need to have some intelligence, right? As we said, it's not easy to categorize the intrusion from one action, because one action or one step might look to you like it's normal, right? But if this step is done as part of many, many steps, and there is some correlation between all these steps, right? Then and only then you can categorize this as an intrusion, right? So it's not straightforward. It's not similar to anything that we studied before. You need to have some statistical measures. Okay? So we need to know about how do we do this. So there is the intrusion detection systems in general, ماشي? Its function is to try to detect the intrusion from the name. And detecting the intrusion معناها ايه؟ To detect misbehavior or a collective steps that should be categorized as intrusion. So this is what we call intrusion detection system. There is the intrusion prevention system. Okay? Detecting the intrusion is something, and preventing the intrusion is another thing. So intrusion prevention systems are much more challenging, much more difficult. Why? Because not only do they detect the intrusion, which is already challenging, as we mentioned, but once they detect the intrusion, they need to perform automated actions. Okay? That on one hand stops the intrusion, but on the other hand keeps the legitimate access of the system running. This is very hard. It's not easy. Yeah, sometimes the easiest thing is just once you detect an intrusion, what do? لا خلاص أنا will stop everything لغاية بقى ما أشوف بقى where is this intrusion مش عارف إيه and then I prevent it. Okay? So more than 90% of the systems, they do that. Their function is only to detect the intrusion. And then they leave the prevention measure to the system analyst. Yeah, the system analyst will get, there is an intrusion, and some information about the intrusion. And then it's up to the network administrator or the security analyst to say, what are the countermeasures that I will take in order to stop that intrusion? Okay? So usually we leave that to the human intervention. Okay? So most of the systems that are currently existing in place, they are intrusion detection systems and not prevention systems. But prevention systems are much harder because they don't only detect the intrusion, but they need to have automated countermeasures to try to prevent the intrusion from affecting the system, yet keep the system up and running. It's very, very challenging, very hard. ماشي? So this is the difference between the two. CERTs, or Computer Emergency Response Teams, CERTs is slightly different from intrusion detection systems or prevention systems. These are group of experts. Okay? Which they can, in fact, perform certain function on the network or the system of the organization, and they try to detect these loopholes manually, but using some human intervention. ماشي? Sometimes this CERT team is hired by the organization. As part of their job, they might actually do some ethical hacking. Remember, you have heard that term, صح? So they try to do some ethical hacking, and then they say, okay, so you have some loophole here, you have some... So I see that this can be accessed through intrusion and so on. So they try to take some measures to try to detect and prevent certain intrusion. The problem with this concept is that it's not timely. It's based on human intervention, and it might take time, right? So, like for example, you discover that يعني مثلا زي اللي حصل أثناء الحصار مثلا for BN مثلا, okay? You discover that there is some kind of damage happened in the organization already. So you recognize that there is some type of intrusion. So you hire a CERT team to try to come and so on and so forth. That will take time, will take days. صح? But if you have already intrusion detection or prevention systems in place, they can automatically detect and stop the intrusion right away. But as we said, that's not easy. Okay? So sometimes you do the intrusion detection systems, automated part, only for detection, and leave the prevention to the human intervention. متابعين ولا؟ Okay? And sometimes you have to do both using human intervention. This is the function of the search team. ماشي؟ اتفضل.
Doctor, they are considered penetration testers?
Yes, so penetration. So they do some penetration testing مثلا to the network in different places. They do some مثلا port scanning. they مش عارف ايه. So they do these jobs in order to try to detect that there is current intrusion, or at least there are some loopholes in the system that can be stopped in order to make sure that intrusions are not going to happen. But certs are human intervention, which performs these steps, which, as I said, in some cases, it's used as a complementary thing to this. You need to have IDS or IPS, okay? And the search team will help you to try to proactively stop any loopholes in the system so that you reduce the probability of intrusions that come to the system. ماشي? So sometimes, especially big organizations, they use a combination of both. واضح؟ ماشي كده؟ طيب. So criminal hackers يعني in some cases مثلا you ask why do يعني these people have to do this? So you need to have يعني any hacker who would do this types of intrusion, they need to have some motivation. Okay? So sometimes مثلا they maybe some of you have already received this مثلا it happened at least to some people I know. They attack مثلا your WhatsApp account, and then they send you an email or send you some message to say that if you want to recover this account, you need to pay me this money. They do this, which we call it ransom. So they request certain ransom in order to give you back the access to your account, and then of course you have to change your password and change your authentication in order to recover your account fully. For some people, hacking مثلا حاجة زي WhatsApp account might actually damage their life because they have connections with lots of people and things like that. So the motivation here is that the attackers, they can perform certain damage to your life, in which case you will be obligated to pay them certain ransoms and so on. But in some cases, or in many cases, these hackers are organized group of hackers. Business يعني. They take hacking as a business يعني. Okay? And then they attack بقى big organizations and stuff like that. So when they ask for ransom, it's not بقى individual. يعني هياخدوا منك ايه يعني $20 ولا $100. In these big organizations, they can take millions as ransoms. ماشي? So they usually have specific targets, or at least classes of targets in mind, as we said. So once a site is penetrated, the attacker acts quickly. So usually, يعني this is بقى basics of attack. يعني once you see مثلا a modem that's unsecure, you discover this loophole, you need to utilize it in the fastest way possible. Okay, so you need to get into the network and try to really get whatever information you can very, very quickly. And that's why this search team might not be a feasible solution in these types of attack, because the hackers are usually very fast. Okay, so even if you discover something like this and you say, okay, so I'm gonna ask the search team to try to Ghostbusters to try to come and save that. لا, يعني if an attacker performs these types of attack, the second counts in some cases, because they can read some passwords file, credit card information, things like that, or private information, and they can collect يعني huge amount of information in no time. Okay, so that's not usually a choice. So that's why IDS and IPS, they can be used for these types of attackers. The search concept might not be that feasible in that case. Okay. But may be less effective because of the quick in and quick out nature of the attack. So even if IDS and IPS, they might not have the quick reaction in some cases. So it takes time for IDS systems to, because as we said, for IDS systems and IPS systems, there are certain tools that they have to use, and usually in many cases, by the way, all the IDS systems nowadays, they use some kind of AI and machine learning. Okay? In many cases, and most of the research that is currently going on in this area mostly use machine learning. And many graduate students, by the way, they are very much attracted to this type of work. And you get some data set from certain organization, مثلا from كهرماء ولا كذا ولا كذا, give me some data and I can analyze it and perform some kind of machine learning and give you some solution to try to detect these intrusions in no time. Okay, so machine learning has been proven to be very, very effective in these types of systems. But we will study also some other issues and implementation issues for these systems. So insider attacks, as we said, insider attacks are the most challenging, especially misfeasor and clandestine users, and because these are legitimate users, right? So somebody might ask, if they are internal attackers, what kind of motivation do they have? Why do you think some insider person to the organization might perform these types of attacks? Leah, what's their motivation?
Maybe they got some money to get some data from that.
Yeah, so they if they can be bribed مثلا from some external organization ولا حاجة زي كده, so through your access I can gain some information, and since you have legitimate access, you can get us this information easily. So this is one of the motivations. Another motivation, ربنا عافينا, which happened to some people I know, is that يعني مثلا they get informed that they need to meet with the manager, and then the manager would say, okay, so you are no longer part of the organization, so please يعني leave your stuff and خلاص. طبعا a person who's informed with something like this, you can imagine his motivation that the first thing he would try to do is just to go back to his office and try to damage everything. right? صح؟ يعني some people might have this kind of frustration, right? And that's why some of the countermeasures is that in many organizations like this, if you inform a person that you are no longer part of the organization, then before actually you inform him about this, all his accesses is stopped. So when he goes back to his desk, he finds that everything he owns inside the organization is totally blocked. Okay? Of course, we do to the extreme sometimes. يعني حتى even you suffer from this. Once you graduate, you see the next day you don't have access to email, you don't have access to anything in the university. So sometimes you do it to the extreme. But in fact, يعني this kind of procedure is done in big يعني organizations, especially who have very, very critical information, and they abruptly inform certain employees that they are terminated or something like this. So sometimes they do these precautionary measures to try to protect the system. So these insider attackers, they can be motivated by certain revenge, ماشي? Or simply a feeling of entitlement. Unfortunately, this happens, and it happened to many people. Okay, so some countermeasures, you need to enforce least privilege. So you give this person least privilege, or only allowing access to resources employees need to do their job. So again, this is it's not easy, because again, as we said, sometimes we do to the extreme. Even we give very, very limited access to even insider user, that we feel that everything is restrictive. Okay, so sometimes we do it to the extreme. So set logs to see what users access and what commands they are entering. So logging is one of the most important tools that we use for intrusion detection, as we will study later. Okay, so the first thing that we do for intrusion detection is always to log all types of activities done inside the system. Okay? So these logs, they can be later on analyzed. Okay? So whenever, assuming حتى that you don't have an IDS or IPS, okay? At least if an intrusion happens, you know this indirectly by observing certain damage. يعني all the email service in Qatar University is down. This is clear. So the intrusion has happened and it's already caused the damage. خلاص? But at least you can use these logs for forensics. So you can go back to these logs and say, okay, so the attack happened. Okay, so we observed that the attack happened during this time. So go back to the logs and say, okay, so the attack happened from this IP address. So somebody has used this machine. So you track back until you know how this intrusion has happened. Okay? So the logging the activities is very, very important tool that's used as part of the intrusion detection and intrusion, whether by it's human intervention or automated techniques. ماشي? They use these logs.
Doctor, logging is for like usually devices given from the company or university, right? So
logging for everything, all services. Yes. يعني you think that مثلا Blackboard or all the services, all the activities that are done by a user or done حتى implicitly or indirectly on the system حتى from the back end مثلا يعني some حتى employee they access the database of Blackboard. Okay, so it's not through the web interface. All these activities are being logged because it's very, very important for any organization to be able to track back that these certain actions led to the fact that we have observed certain intrusion and this intrusion caused this damage.
So Doctor, the one with the root, he can manipulate this. So it's not.
So yeah, manipulating these logs is one of the types of intrusion. Yes, manipulating these logs is one of the types of intrusion. صح. And that's why, in fact, these types of logging has two types. There is general activity logging and there is security or intrusion detection logs. Okay, sometimes the logging is actually done or performed perfectly for intrusion detection. Yeah, there is a special type of logging for intrusion detection. Okay, and there is general logging. Sometimes they are mixed together or integrated in one big logs, and sometimes they are separate.
No one can manipulate.
Yeah, well, you can have access privileges to these logs differently. يعني مثلا the admin would have access differently to the general activity logs, but the security admin has access to the security logs مثلا. This way you divide and conquer. You divide the responsibility between two people. So, and that's why, as I said, the hardest type of intruders to detect is the we call them the clandestine user. Clandestine user. As you said, clandestine user has someone internal to the organization and he has admin privilege. هتعمل له ايه ده؟ واحد يعني دخل all the logs, he actually modified all the logs. So the first thing he does when he performs the intrusion, remove all the logs from the system. He removed يعني كل حاجة يعني. But that's why the hardest one to detect is the clandestine user.
But so they're only tracking your access to these services, or in company devices would they track all activities?
All activities, yes. We have certain action coming from this IP address, from your machine to web service to Blackboard to whatever.
Even if they access like Google, or do you log everything they do if it's a company device?
Well, that it depends, because some of these activities they might not be able to log it. Like for example, if you use مثلا if you access certain website and you are using HTTPS, they can do certain logging from the lower layers. But as we said, HTTPS, everything is encrypted from the application point of view. Application level information and application headers are encrypted. but TCP header and everything else are not encrypted. So they can know the port, yes. So they can log the port. They can log the IP address, صح? They can do all this information, but they don't know which URL مثلا you have access. They don't know. They don't know whether you access google.com or yahoo.com. They don't know.
Plus, ISPs, they know every site you've entered now.
Again, it depends, because if you it depends, because if you are using VPN, how can they know? Because everything is tunneled.
Yeah.
Even as we said, even sometimes the original IP header might be encrypted. Come in, original IP header, so they have access to the outer IP header only. Even IPS, yeah. So even مثلا in your جربها حتى in your router. If your router at home, the router at home logs everything, logs all the activities. There is some software that you can down. لا هو depends on the type of the router. يعني I have مثلا I have very sophisticated router at home that logs everything and it gives me all the information عشان الأولاد يعني. But we use this just to see يعني okay. But sometimes if you use VPN, if you use VPN, how can the router see? Because the VPN is done from host to the network, so it tunnels everything and everything is encrypted. So you don't even have access to the URL or anything, or even the TCP header or port number, nothing. You have access to nothing.
Plus you said what's called the URL would be protected even if it's well VPN in certain like HTTPS or...
Yes, of course, the URL and all the application level content is totally hidden from you. But يعني مثلا يعني if you don't use VPN, يعني I see the history of all the websites that they have interacted with. I can see that, okay? But if they use VPN, خلاص, I don't have access to anything. Okay. طيب, protect sensitive resources with strong authentication, as we have discussed. يعني, so these are some of the countermeasures. But as you can see, some of these countermeasures, they hit back on different layers. They hit multiple layers. Sometimes one of these countermeasures, they have to be combined or addressed from multiple layers. ماشي? Upon termination, اللي احنا كنا بنتكلم عليها السنة اللي احنا كنا بنتكلم عليها, someone has been informed that they are terminated. Upon termination, delete the employee's computer and network access. Okay? So sometimes this happens abruptly. It happened, especially حتى يعني برا يعني outside وكده في أمريكا. This is a very clear procedure. Someone gets invited in the office, okay, you are no longer working in this company. على طول, they go back to their desk, they find everything is blocked. They cannot even use the phone. Nothing. Everything is terminated.
Well, some people, they find everything blocked, then they get invited to the office. لو قبل ما يعرفوا.
Yes, it happened to يعني ربنا عافينا يعني, it happened to some friends of mine يعني. But in some cases طبعا not, just the fact that they do this, it doesn't mean that you don't have access to sensitive information which you have backed it up on your مثلا home computer هنا ولا هنا ولا هنا, صح? And you can use this, and this information might contain certain مثلا intellectual property ولا مثلا بشتغل أنا في مايكروسوفت ولا حاجة, I was part of a team implemented Windows. تخيل. Okay, so all of a sudden I'm terminated. Okay, so I will distribute Windows code to everyone. يعني طبعا it's still not easy, but in that case طبعا you can upon termination make a mirror image of the employee's data. Okay, so you maintain this information so that later on you can track this person and hold them accountable for the fact that they have used some internal information inside the organization. And they do lawsuits back against some people that they have breached on the مثلا some confidential information. They hold them accountable. ماشي؟ طيب, so see, these are some definition. خلينا نقف هنا عشان احنا خدنا over